for joining us, for joining this webinar in which we will discuss an overview of SAP BW Powered by HANA. Before we get started, just a few logistics. In the interest of noise reduction, all participants will be on mute during the course of this webinar. You will, however, have the opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A portion of the call by clicking the chat icon and directing questions directly to the moderator. And I'll repeat that a little bit later in the presentation. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes and will include at least 10 minutes of Q&A. I will start things off by very briefly sharing some information about our organization, and then I will turn the presentation over to our BI Practice Director, Al Weedman. Real quick, just kind of a real quick overview of BICP. We are a dedicated SAP Business Intelligence Consulting Services Organization, and from a technology perspective, we focus specifically on SAP HANA, BusinessObjects and BW. We are a certified SAP Services Partner, have very strong relationships with the product development groups, HANA BI organizations, and we deploy business intelligence solutions specifically for SAP-centric enterprises. Our value proposition in a nutshell is really a flexible, low overhead business model where we leverage highly experienced consultants, kind of smaller teams that have that deep experience, and we couple that with a rigorous project management methodology and on-site consultants, again, that are at that platinum level. Al, if we could go maybe to the next slide. And here's just sort of an overview of what we do from kind of a BI point of view. We would do everything from BI strategies, implementations, upgrades, as well as Tier 1 support. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Al to introduce himself and to go ahead and kick off the presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Sean. Well, today I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time and joining us for this webinar. As Sean mentioned, I'll be giving you an overview on SAP BW Powered by HANA. So I'm sure that most everyone on the call dialed in either because you're trying to make a decision on whether to utilize BW in your current or upcoming HANA landscape, or you're just curious on how BW works in conjunction with HANA. This webinar hopefully will assist you in making the decisions in regards to your future landscape. So today we'll be discussing a quick overview of SAP HANA, BICP's thoughts on why BW should be in the landscape with SAP HANA in an enterprise data warehousing scenario. We'll take a look at what an EDW architecture looks like in BW Powered by HANA. There are some differences in the way you would architect in comparison to a BW on top of a relational database. And then we'll get a little bit more technical and we'll start to show some of the individual development components that are unique to BW when you're running on top of a HANA database. So first stop, why to use SAP HANA and BW Powered by HANA? So this slide, on the bottom left, it's a little graph which kind of shows the number of transistors on a chip over time. Now, depending on what your starting point is for this graph, it would look pretty much the same via Moore's law. But what has happened in the last, I would say, 5-10 years is that we've finally reached an inflection point where whole computer systems can be held in memory. They don't have to be on disk anymore. So what does this mean? Historically, with SAP and BW, disk speed has been the major bottleneck, as other areas such as network and CPU have always had greater performance increases, but disk has never quite matched Moore's law as far as the I/O of it. So what this meant is that when we built our BW data warehouse and we coded an ABAP, we built in such a way to minimize the number of reads against the database. And this resulted in very complex data flows and architectures. And HANA is changing this in conjunction with the fact that it's also a columnar database versus a row database, which leads to great performance as well as compression capabilities. So SAP's in-memory solution is HANA. SAP HANA takes advantage of modern advances in multi-core CPUs and inexpensive RAM. Once again, it's based on storing data in memory. Tables are in columnar format, and basically what this means is when you're doing reads against a table, each column is read individually versus every row having to be read from beginning to end. So once again, it just leads to great performance increases without having to build secondary indexes or really thinking through quite as much how end users are going to query the tables. SAP, it's a database. It doesn't do anything without extraction, transformation, loading, and reporting tools integrated with it. SAP HANA has tools such as HANA Studio to model with. SAP has data services to do extraction and transformation with. There are other third-party ETL tools that are certified, such as Informatica now. Or you can use SAP BW on top of HANA as your ETL tool. So why move to HANA? Well, some of the newer business objects tools, such as predictive analysis and Lumira, really need to be running on HANA to achieve their full usefulness. PA and Lumira can work without HANA, but especially with predictive analysis running on the HANA server is much more efficient, and you can do analysis on much larger data volumes than you would be able to running on the desktop install. In addition, pretty much all of SAP's products are either being ported to run on HANA or they're being integrated with HANA. So I think that across the board, pretty much everything SAP will run better on HANA than it will supposedly with, say, Oracle 12c, which is Oracle's in-memory solution for people that are running their systems on Oracle. A lot of you are probably on the BW Accelerator. The BWA, it only increases the speed for reporting, but it does require additional layers of loads to move the data into the accelerator because it is an appliance on top of BW. SAP HANA, the whole system is already in memory and it's already accelerated. In BW, complex requirements that required many layers of lookups and logic during the ETL project required very complex data flows and a lot of ABAP. And coming up, we'll take a look at some data flows that will show how using HANA, SAP BW on HANA, can reduce your complexity, which in turn will reduce the time to deliver solutions. So there's really three different options to build data warehouses on HANA. I know everybody's hearing a lot about HANA Live. So if you're on if your ECC is not running on HANA, but you're running a sidecar system, that's called a HANA Live sidecar. SAP delivers some really great views that run on HANA. So I'd equate this to the business content that you always got with BW that made pulling data out of ECC or other SAP systems much faster. So the nice thing about HANA Live is that it's real time. There's a technology called SAP Landscape Transformation, which loads real-time data from tables in any database SAP systems are running in, or even systems that are not SAP, over to HANA, and actually SLT can load into BW as well. These views can be extended with customer-specific tables, but it does take some work to do that. Some of the negatives of HANA Live is that with SLT, you can't really do much in the way of transformations during loading. So the way the table looks in ECC is pretty much the way it's going to look in your HANA system. You can do some minor transformations, but nothing too robust. So HANA Live seems to be more appropriate for more operational type reporting versus analytics, where you typically are doing a lot of harmonization, a lot of transformations to be able to deliver the business requirements. And then if you have complex requirements that just extending the SAP delivered view would require, you may have to create your own custom views, which is fine. You do that a lot in HANA anyway, but HANA Live may not deliver every single solution for you. And then on the right-hand side, we have custom ETL and modeling. So people that have grown up in the world of more relational database-based data warehousing will be very familiar with this. You build your fact table, you build your dimensions, you build the joins between your fact table and dimensions. Unlike BW, which all this kind of happens behind the scenes. Your BW extractors can still be used to load into a custom modeled HANA solution, which gives you a lot of flexibility. And then a con, of course, is that more than likely your staff is used to BW, and it's a little bit of a skill change to move over to the world where you do have to fully model your solutions. And the HANA overall tool chest is not quite as robust across the board as BW is, as far as modeling and security and job scheduling, etc. So, and finally, for BW running on top of HANA, it's a well-known technology. It's very robust. We know how to build very layered, structured business warehouse EDWs with it. And SAP, as we'll show, has made a strong commitment to continue to innovate its capabilities. The one major negative I see is that BW right now does not run right on the HANA database. It does require separate app servers, ABAP stack app servers to run. So our viewpoint, BICP's viewpoint, is that HANA Live has its place in the landscape. It's very appropriate for operational reporting. Custom development with HANA Studio and data services could be a very valid solution, but at the same time, BW gives a great solution for your ETL process that runs great on top of HANA. And just to keep in mind, if you do use BW with HANA, it doesn't prevent you from building with the other HANA tools and HANA Studio, and SAP is calling this mixed use scenarios. So many of you are probably loading the BW Accelerator. I think one of the first questions, of course, is going to be, if we invested in this, why should we move to HANA? HANA as a whole system is now in memory. not just the specific info cubes that you moved over to the BW Accelerator. That means that everything experiences the similar performance gains. Secondly, building with the BWA really doesn't allow you to reduce the layers in your architecture. It actually increases the layers. So it's actually increasing the amount of time that you have to load through your system. And if you're a very large data volume company, you know that you're very often hitting batch limits. So great for reporting, doesn't do much on the ETL side. One thing I want to add is I know in some of SAP's marketing materials, they allude to the fact that you can possibly redeploy your BWA appliance as HANA. I haven't seen it done yet, so I think anybody that's considering moving to HANA, you really have to have some conversations with your hardware vendor, whether the appliance that you're on can be redeployed.
Apologies for the slight delay. We're experiencing some technical difficulties.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
How long was I off for?
Just a minute now.
Okay. So to move on to this slide kind of shows that as of BW SP4, the HANA Studio modeler was based on Eclipse, and the BW modeler was built on the GUI that we're used to build, the SAP GUI that we're used to building on. Currently, BW 7.4 is on SP7, so as you can see, SPs are coming out very, very quickly right now, and unlike in previous generations of BW where support packs were typically fixes, right now support packs are a lot of new functionality. So you're going to have to think about keeping up with support packs perhaps a little more aggressively than what you did in the past for, I would say, the next several years. As of 7.4 SP5, the BW GUI is now moving towards Eclipse. So some of the newer components that you can build with in BW do have Eclipse-based platforms. You do have to actually use the Eclipse platform to get the full functionality. And what this really shows is that the ABAP workbench, the BW workbench, are really starting to converge down with HANA Studio. And I think you're going to see over time the distinction between HANA Studio and BW modeling to begin to go down. So it's really just one tool where BW is an enhanced version of HANA. So what does a BW powered by HANA architecture looks like? This is just a quick slide to give a touch points of data flows from source systems at the bottom through ETL tools, the next layer up, modeling tools, the next layer, to BEX to reporting tools. So we're primarily going to be focused on the BW layer for this rest of this presentation, which is on the left side, third row from the bottom, and anything that really touches it. So how does SAP NetWeaver with BW work? BW is running on an ABAP stack, which currently is a separate app server. It isn't running directly on HANA, like I mentioned. I anticipate over time that SAP will port the ABAP stack down to HANA, but this is a large and complex undertaking, so it's going to take a little bit of time. But whether you're converting an existing BW implementation to HANA or building in a greenfield environment, there are now many new objects and capabilities available. There's new objects such as composite providers and transient providers, which we're going to talk about. DSOs are now column store by default. You don't have to convert from a column to a row format. And finally, info cubes are honestly not needed for the most part within BW anymore. Most of your modeling is going to be in DSOs. You may have a few cases where you do need an inventory cube, which still has to be in an info cube. For planning, there are now planning DSOs, so you don't have to use info cubes for planning functions anymore. So for the most part, info cubes are gone and the extended star schema is gone. Similar to what we saw with the Accelerator, BW Accelerator over time, where OLAP capabilities were moving from the OLAP engine down to the BWA. We're seeing the same thing with HANA. The OLAP capabilities are moving from the OLAP engine into HANA. Every support pack pushes more and more down, and I think you're going to continue to see this happening. And from a query perspective, you're going to see very shortly the BEX Query Designer also move to the Eclipse GUI. So once again, everything is getting poured down into HANA. In the relational database days, we would try to push as much logic into the application layer as possible and only bring the data from the database and not do the calculations down in the DB layer. And the paradigm shift now is that because HANA is so powerful, we want to run as much of the query logic and query and SQL directly in HANA and only pass back the final result to the application layer. And this really changes how we build solutions. So this is what a solution might look like in the old BW world. Say to build a joined billing and sales order solution. You'd bring the data into BW to the first PSA layer. You'd have individual DSOs, then you'd have a joined DSO, then you'd push it into an info cube, and then you'd load it into a BW Accelerator aggregate. And so this might be 5 layers of data movement. When you move into a BW on HANA world, things are much, much simpler. There's a new object called Composite Provider, which we're going to talk about in upcoming slides, which is really going to enhance and give you a lot of new capabilities on how you model solutions with BW. So at the end of the day, you don't have to build all of these layers of data movements in BW. So this is going to greatly increase your load times and reduce the complexity of your solutions. One thing I want to add, as everybody's probably familiar with the layered scalable architecture, with HANA now, it's now called LSA++. This is SAP's vision on how you should architect your layers in BW. I just wanted to add this slide. It's a discussion of its own where we could talk for a half hour just about LSA++, but there's already a lot of good decks out there on the SAP website that talks about how you might model in the HANA world and build your layers out versus as you did on the BW world. So I recommend taking a look, Google it, LSA++, and there'll be some very, very good information. And then finally in this section, just to talk a little bit about the business objects tools with HANA. The main point of this slide is all of your business objects tools, reporting and analytical tools are going to continue to work when you're running on HANA. For most of them, you'll continue to create BEX queries, and the analytics will run with your BICS connection. Most of the newer products, such as Lumira and Explorer and Analysis and Design Studio, they've been built to connect directly to HANA as well. So even if you're running BW on HANA, you can hit the models directly in the HANA layer and bypass the connection and the BW OLAP engine if and when it makes sense. So moving on to what are the new capabilities that you have with BW running on HANA? There's a handful of new development objects that are very, very useful. So what does this mean? For extraction, you're going to continue to use the same tools as you did with BW. You can still use the BW extractors. You can still integrate many third-party ETL tools in. You can SLT into BW just as you can with HANA. I would say the ETL process is pretty much the same. The main difference is that SAP has greatly enhanced the speed at which your DSO activations occur. I had a 53 million row DSO that recently that we did the activation for, and it took 8 minutes, which as anybody out there knows, is very, very fast. So BW can now be extended to even much, much larger data warehouses with potentially not as much parallelization of DSOs that you had to do in the past. As I mentioned before, InfoCube's no longer a requirement. And then I would say the best new development component that's available is the Composite Provider. We'll talk some more specifics about this, but the Composite Provider, once again, is really going to change how you develop and model with BW. I just have to do a quick overview of the view types that are specific to HANA Studio, because if I don't show you what the different views are, the next slides won't make as much sense. The first view is an attribute view. If you're a BW person, an attribute view is basically your info objects master data. So it's a join of one or several tables that have attributes to your text tables. So you're usually going to see your attribute views be master data, but they don't have to be. Your analytical views are basically your DSO that joins your fact table, which is your DSO, to your dimensions, which are your attribute views. And then the calculation view is one or many tables, attribute views, or analytical views that have joins or unions or other logic built into them. And the calculation view is a very good tool, and we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. One of the first things that you're going to want to know is when you build a DSO in BW, HANA sees the tables, but it doesn't know what the joins are between the tables. So one of the things that you're going to do a lot when you build a DSO in HANA is you're going to check this new box called External SAP HANA View. And what this does is that it builds an analytical view down in HANA that builds all the joins between the fact table and dimensions, which you don't see in the BW world because the modeler does it on its own. The main reason why you're going to have to export your model to HANA is for a few of the tools. Explore runs off of the HANA layer, and Lumira runs much, much better off of the HANA layer than it does off of Beck's queries. So once again, like I said, Lumira, you really want to export down to HANA. And then also, there may be cases where you want to build calculation views on top of the models that you built with BW, and you're going to want to export your view down to the HANA layer to then build a calculation view. One of the first objects that was available with BW and HANA was a transient provider. A transient provider was really a very, very easy way to expose a HANA model inside of BW and run a BEX query on top. Now, the negative of Transient Provider is that you can't hook any navigational attributes of your info objects into it. You can't transport a transient provider. And so it's really not a development object. It's really just for ad hoc use. Maybe you just want to be able to create a quick BEX query on top of a view or a table that's down in HANA. But in general, I don't think you will be using transient providers near as much as perhaps maybe a year and a half ago. A virtual provider, it's not a new BW object, but it has been enhanced to be based on a HANA model. So what does this mean? You can view from BEX analytical and calculation views that were built at the HANA layer from the BW layer. So you can build BEX queries off of native HANA solutions, HANA Live, custom-built HANA solutions, etc. And so you can also hook in info objects navigational attributes. So that makes it very powerful. If you have some info objects that are only in the BW layer, but your view is down the HANA layer, you can hook these in with each other. You can't look at attribute views yet in virtual providers. There is some guidance that this will happen, but there is another object which I'm going to talk about next called the Open ODS View, which you can view any view or table that's been built down in the HANA layer. The Open ODS View is the newest object, and I think it's probably the one that you're going to use the most from BW to interact with HANA views. There's a new Eclipse-based GUI for Open ODS Views, which I've shown in the slide. So why use Open ODS Views, considering it's a little more complex than a virtual provider? You can expose any HANA table. You can expose smart data access virtual tables that are ODBC connections on top of Hadoop or IQ or Teradata. You can utilize the navigational attributes of the assigned info objects. And as of SP8, which will be coming out soon, you can map in BW transformations. So you can have ABAP logic that run in memory at query runtime. And this will be a very neat functionality. We'll have to be very cognizant of performance ramifications of this. But the in-memory transformations, I think, will be a very, very easy way to apply simple transformations on your fields. You can use any data source, and you can bring these views into BW data flows. So objects that were built in HANA can now be brought into BW DSOs and through a multi-layer LSA. And there's one additional object that option which Open ODS Views will be able to switch into persistent DSOs. And this is currently in pilot phase. I haven't had a chance to play around with it yet, but it seems like an interesting concept where perhaps you do want to bring data from another database that you were running an ODBC view on top of, and you want to bring that into BW. And HANA, this will be an easy way to bring this over into HANA for performance reasons. The next is virtual master data. There are some new fields in your info object screen to assign a SAP package and attribute views. The main thing that you're going to use this for is if you have your attribute view down in HANA and you've exposed a virtual provider on top of a calculation view in BW, and you have an attribute view that already isn't inside of that calculation or analytical view, this is an easy way to bring that attribute view into the join. I don't know how often you're actually going to be bring a view into BW that you haven't already done all the modeling down in HANA, but it could happen. So the Composite Provider, this is a great tool, a great object. A Composite Provider does unions of joins of BW objects, DSOs, cubes, info objects, as well as HANA analytical and calculation views. So specifically in a BW world, you're going to be using Composite Provider the most because it will perform efficient joins down at the database layer of BW objects, which info sets were not efficient. Info sets worked primarily at the application layer and were very, very slow. So basically, Composite Provider is the replacement for info sets. Now, Composite Providers could replace multi-providers and do unions, but more than likely, you'll probably stick with multi-providers for unions. So finally, calculation views were the complex views down in HANA where you can do layers of unions and joins. How does this interact with BW? Oh, and also there's a language called SQL script for more complex calculation views. So how does this interact with BW? The Composite Provider can do some really good joins and unions, but if there are more complex joins and unions that you need to do, you may want to expose your BW DSO in HANA, create a SQL script or graphical calculation view on top of it with some very, very complex logic that runs at query runtime, and then port it back over to the BW side with a virtual provider or open ODS view. What this does is it allows you to not have to build, once again, layer after layer inside a BW with lots of ABAP logic to pre-stage the data. You can now have very complex logic and a full coding language in HANA SQL script calculation views that run at query runtime. And then one quick item, any view or any stored procedure that you've built in HANA can be called from the ABAP layer with some very, very simple configuration and ABAP calls. And so how would you use this? Potentially in transformations where you have some stored procedures down in HANA. Perhaps tables and views are not exposed at the BW layer and they're down in the HANA layer. And it's more efficient to have that logic happen down in HANA versus in BW ABAP stack. So that's everything I have. I'd like to turn it over to Sean, and he will moderate the question and answer section.
Okay. Thank you, Al. Very much appreciate that. We have about 7 minutes. So if people had individual questions for Al, if you could go ahead and click the chat icon at the top of your screen and direct your questions to moderator, we'd be happy to go through the Q&A. Okay, we have a first question, Al, which would be, how easy would it be to migrate the BW cubes and DSO to the HANA model?
So for DSOs, as of BW SP4, you no longer have to do any migration. Prior to 7.4 SP4, there was something called a HANA optimized DSO. As of SP4, that has gone away. So there's basically nothing you need to do with a DSO. Now, if you do want to expose the model for that DSO in HANA, you do have to go into the DSO, check the expose in HANA checkbox, and do an activation, and that will push the whole model and joins down to HANA. Now, InfoCubes, there is now an option called HANA Optimized InfoCubes. That is still there. What that does is it does some denormalization of your InfoCube. So it basically pushes your dimensions and normalizes it down with the fact table. I think this is a great thing because it makes your InfoCube look like a DSO. It makes it much more efficient in the HANA world. It's very easy to do that conversion of an InfoCube to the HANA model, but you don't have to do it.
Okay, perfect. Al, we have another question. Do stored procedures replace ABAP function modules?
They could. They don't. The functionality of function modules and BAPIs and methods and all of the ABAP stack capabilities, they're still there if you are running an ABAP stack, so an ECC system or a BW system on top of HANA. The stored procedure runs in the HANA layer. So it's the equivalent of a function module, but it's running down in the database. So via that configuration that I showed in the last slide, you can call these stored procedures from an ABAP program, and it may or may not be worth it. If you have something that has poor performance, it may run much more simply and faster down in the HANA layer. But if you have a function module that's just very simple, it may make sense just to keep it in a function module. You may not see much of a performance improvement porting it down to a stored procedure.
Okay. And then we have another question. Do we need to migrate queries which are on regular BW cubes when we migrate the BW cube on HANA?
There is no migration of queries. Your queries will continue to run as is.
Okay. Okay. Are there any additional questions from the audience? Okay. Well, we certainly appreciate everybody's time today. And Al, thank you for delivering such a good presentation. I will be following up with emails with everyone on the call if people have obviously individual questions or questions that may be pertinent to their landscape and what their organizations are looking to do. We certainly are happy to schedule one-on-one calls with you and your organization if you'd like. So go ahead and look for that email. We will be doing another series of webinars in the coming months and look forward to your participation. And we'll look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you.